It was one of those mornings when New York looked like it had been swallowed whole by its own fog. You couldn't see the top of Flatiron Building from 6th Avenue, and the streets carried that damp chill that seeps into your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it. I was at Cafe Reggio, same corner table as always, the kind that lets you watch the world go by without it watching you back. My coffee had gone bitter, overbrewed, the way the old barista likes to do it, but I drank it anyway. The bitter was fitting. That's when a man in a gray suit stepped inside. He scanned the room once, eyes locking on me like he already knew I'd be here. Mid-40s, good posture, the kind of jaw that made you think he'd clench it in his sleep. He introduced himself as Henry Caldwell, slid into the seat opposite me without waiting for an invitation. His cologne smelled expensive, but there was a sourness underneath, tension, maybe fear. He got straight to it. Said his wife had been slipping away after work, claiming to be with friends, coming home later than she used to. Her stories didn't line up, he told me, and lately she'd been guarding her phone like it was the nuclear codes. He'd followed her once, but lost her in traffic near Market Street. He wanted proof, the kind you can't argue with. I've heard variations of the same story more times than I can count. Sometimes the client's just paranoid, other times they're right, but wish they weren't. Either way, people don't hire a guy like me unless they're ready for the truth to hurt. He slid a retainer check across the table, 5 figures, enough to pay my North Beach rent for a couple of months, and still have cash left for bourbon. I told him I'd take the job, but I didn't promise he'd like the ending. 2 evenings later, I was parked in my '94 Chevy Caprice just off Sutter Street, engine idling low, camera sitting on the passenger seat with a fresh memory card. I watched the boutique hotel entrance through a smear of fog on the windshield. At exactly 6:07 p.m., she arrived. Mid-30s, brunette, wrapped in a camel coat. She moved with that unhurried confidence you only see in people who know they're being noticed. She went inside, and 20 minutes later she came back out, but she wasn't alone. That's when the air in the car seemed to thicken. The man walking beside her wasn't Henry, and he wasn't a stranger. His name was Victor Kane. Last time I'd seen Kane, we were on opposite ends of a corruption case back in Jersey City. I was a cop then, chasing a trail of laundered money that led right to his office door. He had the best lawyers money could buy, the kind who can turn evidence into dust and walk their client out the front door without a scratch. He walked, I burned out, and 2 months later my badge was in a desk drawer instead of on my chest. Seeing him now, here in New York, on the arm of another man's wife, wasn't just bad luck. It was the kind of coincidence that makes you check if someone upstairs is taking bets on your life. I lifted the camera, caught their faces in the frame, but my mind was already digging at the question, why here? Why her? Why now? Kane didn't do casual. If he was meeting someone's wife in a city 3,000 miles from home, there was a bigger game in play. They headed south toward Union Square, cutting through the evening crowd. I followed at a half-block's distance, keeping to the shopfront shadows along Post Street. The air smelled of chestnuts from a street cart, cable cars clanged in the distance, and the neon from the Weston St. Francis sign flickered against the low clouds. Every so often she'd glance up at him, smiling in that subtle way women do when they think no one's watching. And Kane wore that same smug half-smile he'd had in the courtroom years ago, like he already knew the ending and it was going to be his. By the time they disappeared into the glass doors of an upscale wine bar on Geary, I'd stopped thinking about Henry Caldwell's marriage. This wasn't just about his wife. This was about Victor Kane, back in my life like a bad debt I'd forgotten to pay. And in my experience, when Kane shows up, someone's going to get bled dry. I just didn't realize yet how close to home the knife would land. I've tailed a lot of people in my time. Cheating spouses, double-dealing partners, the occasional bookie who forgot the meaning of a deadline. But the days after spotting Kane felt different. Normally, I keep some distance between me and the case, but this one was already threading itself into places I didn't want it. I started small. License plate runs, public record searches, and the kind of quiet calls you only make to people who owe you favors. Kane was registered at an address in Pacific Heights, a glass and steel penthouse with a bay view, the kind of place where the doorman doesn't blink if you come in with a briefcase full of cash. I staked it out from a spot near Lafayette Park, camera ready, sipping coffee from that little corner place on Laguna that burns the beans just enough to keep tourists away. 3 days in, the pattern emerged. Kane left early afternoons, never in the same car twice. A Porsche one day, a black Escalade the next, always heading toward the financial district. Twice, he met Caldwell's wife in the lobby of the Mark Hopkins on Nob Hill. Once, it was the Fairmont. Public places, polished, crowded enough for privacy. They talked, they laughed, sometimes their hands brushed in that way that says you've crossed lines before. And here's where the floor dropped out from under me. On the 4th day, the woman walking toward him in the hotel lobby wasn't Caldwell's wife. It was mine, Rachel. At first I thought my eyes were lying. The lighting, the fog on the glass doors, the distance. But no, the tilt of her head when she listened, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the little half-step she took back when someone got too close. I knew those like I knew my own handwriting. She was smiling. At him. I didn't take the shot right away. My hand was on the camera, but my stomach had knotted so tight I could barely breathe. I watched them disappear into the elevator, Kane's hand on her lower back like it had always belonged there. The elevator doors closed, and I was still standing there in the lobby shadow, pretending I was just another guy waiting for someone who wasn't coming. I spent the rest of the day circling the city, not tailing anyone, just driving, down Van Ness to the marina, out to Ocean Beach where the wind cuts through you, back through the sunset where the fog rolls low over the rooftops. I was trying to file it somewhere in my head where it wouldn't feel like a blade. But every route brought me back to the same truth. Kane and Rachel weren't strangers. That night, I poured 2 fingers of rye in my North Beach apartment and started going through Rachel's recent stories. The work trips to Oakland, the late nights at the office for her logistics firm down on Pier 39. I started looking at those gaps like crime scenes, seeing them for what they were. Paranoia isn't born loud. It's a whisper that gets sharper every hour you don't silence it. I told myself I'd confront her. Soon. But not before I had something she couldn't explain away. I needed proof. Real proof. And the only way to get it was to step deeper into Kane's shadow, no matter how much it meant dragging my own marriage into the light. The thing about digging, though, you can't always control what you dig up. 2 days later, a call from an old Newark contact gave me my first solid lead. Kane wasn't keeping all his business in the city. He was crossing the river. Liberty State Park, Thursday afternoons. It was enough to put me on a train east before the coffee in my cup could cool. There's a kind of silence you only get in Liberty State Park. Wide open space. The Hudson stretched out in front of you. Manhattan rising in the distance like a wall of glass and steel. I'd worked cases there before, back when I was still on the force in Jersey City. If you wanted a meeting away from curious ears, the park was perfect. Plenty of places to disappear into the crowd, and the water carried away whatever you didn't want overheard. I'd gotten a tip from one of my old contacts in Newark, a longshoreman who'd moved enough crates for enough people to know when someone like Kane was making arrangements. He told me Kane had been seen near the park on Thursday afternoons. That was all I needed. I was there early, parked near the south end by the ferry terminal. Camera bag slung over my shoulder, ball cap pulled low. It was one of those crisp afternoons where the wind off the river cuts into you, but the sun tricks you into thinking it's warm. Families were out, joggers on the path, a couple of fishermen by the pier. I didn't have to wait long. At 3:17, Kane walked into view, his coat collar turned up, phone in hand. He wasn't alone. Rachel was with him. No coat, just a deep green sweater I'd given her last Christmas, the one she said made her feel like she belonged in some glossy winter catalog. She looked happy, not polite happy, not the smile you give a coworker. This was different. I stayed back, switched to the long lens. Through the glass, I caught every detail. The way she leaned in when he spoke, the laugh that tilted her head just enough for her hair to fall over her shoulder, the hand she rested on his arm, when he pointed something out across the water. It wasn't the kind of body language you fake. A gust off the river carried the sharp smell of brine and engine oil. Somewhere behind me, a camera shutter clicked, not mine. I didn't turn. In this line of work, you learn that looking over your shoulder can be louder than a shout. I eased one step deeper into the shade of the pier's railing, the lens steady, the distance between us shrinking in my mind. Then came the moment that ended whatever hope I'd been holding on to. They stopped near the edge of the pier. Kane said something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the shift in her face. She reached up, touched his cheek. He put his hand over hers. No rush, no guilt, just possession. And then he kissed her. Slow, certain. I kept shooting, every frame another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. The camera felt heavier with each click, like the weight wasn't in the hardware anymore, but in what I was collecting. Proof for Henry Caldwell? Sure. But now it was also proof for me. The kind you can't unsee, the kind that rewires your understanding of the person you've been living with. The wind off the river hit my face like a warning I didn't want to hear. Somewhere a ferry horn blew, long and low, like the city itself was counting down to something I couldn't stop. They stayed there another 10 minutes, side by side, watching the ferries cut across the Hudson. When they finally turned and started walking back toward the parking lot, I was already moving in the opposite direction, slipping between the joggers and tourists, keeping them in sight, but making sure I didn't cross their path. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the certainty. Whatever game Kane was playing, Rachel wasn't just a piece on the board. She was in it with him. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches overhead, and for a second I thought about how easy it would be to just hand the photos to Caldwell, cash the check, and walk away. But I knew better. Kane's shadow had been trailing me for years, and now he'd found a way to step right into my home. From the corner of my eye, I caught a man in a windbreaker leaning on the rail, his head turned just enough to watch me. No phone, no camera, just watching. And then he was gone into the crowd, like I'd imagined him. And if there's one thing I've learned in this line of work, it's that shadows don't go away until you drag them into the light. By the time I tailed them back across the river, the sun had traded warmth for glare, and the Hudson looked like a sheet of hammered steel. Jersey City's glass towers threw long shadows over Exchange Place, and the PATH station breathed commuters up to street level like a tired beast. Kane liked public places, crowded, polished, and loud enough to bury a whisper. So I wasn't surprised when they drifted along the esplanade past the Colgate clock and ducked into the waterfront, the kind of spot where the napkins are heavier than most people's wallets. Linen, soft light, harbor views. Money's natural habitat. I came in a few minutes later, hat off, coat open, carrying the easy slouch of a man traveling alone. The hostess clocked me as harmless and gave me a two-top near the windows, close enough to see their reflections in the glass, far enough that no one would think I'd come to stare. My phone rested face down on the table, a thin directional mic taped under the collar of my jacket and pointed where I needed it. Old habits, older tricks. Rachel and Kane had the corner banquette with the skyline framed behind them like a promise. She wore that green sweater again, soft against the winter light. He ordered a burgundy without looking at the list, the kind of move men practice when they want a room to believe in them. Then, mid-sentence, he glanced toward the window, not at the skyline, but at the glass just to my right. His eyes didn't search. They found me, like they'd been there the whole time. A faint curl of a smile touched his mouth before he turned back to her, never missing a beat. Their body language told the simple story, intimacy without apology, but I was there for the complicated one. I needed to hear the words that lived beneath the smiles. The room hummed. Forks, low laughter, a waiter calling behind, near the kitchen pass. Under it, the mic found pockets of quiet, a drift of sentences that came and went like the tide. Not love talk. Business. I stirred a chowder I didn't want and let the phrases gather. Drivers can stage on Marin. Kane said, casual. No idling tickets if they roll in after midnight. Rachel nodded. eyes on the menu but not reading. Invoices split by lane, she murmured. A through C looked domestic, D goes to subcontractors. Another beat. Through Holland, off-peak only. Holland. The tunnel. I sipped water, tasted copper anyway. They paused for the wine, the server pouring with ceremony. Rachel lifted her glass, glanced toward the window, saw only herself and the city beyond. What about Liberty? She asked softer. It's been good cover. Kane smiled like a man watching a chessboard break his way. We'll keep it. Walks in the park soothed the nervous. The server left. The room tightened again. Bills of lading get a second set, she said, steady now. Ghost copies, same numbers, different contents. If they audit what we want. He leaned in. And if someone asks about the containers? She didn't blink. Short-term storage in Newark. Temporary custodianship. It sounds boring. People stop digging when they're bored. I felt the floor tilt, just a fraction. This wasn't a fling that had spiraled into carelessness. This was logistics dressed up as romance. Or maybe the other way around. Port schedules, tunnels, invoices split by lanes. A pipeline. Money in motion tends to pick up dirt. Kane had always known where to sell the dirt. The entrees arrived. My server suggested the scallops. I agreed because pretending is a kind of armor. Rachel's voice lowered, the way it does when truth gets expensive. We're clean on paper, Victor. But Mark, she paused there, a name dropped like a stone in water. Mark's good at the off-paper parts. Kane didn't ask who Mark was. He knew. Then you keep him comfortable, he said, almost kindly. Routine is a blanket. Let him keep it. The words lodged somewhere in the back of my skull, not because of what they meant, but because I'd heard them before. From Rachel. Months ago, I watched their reflection in the glass. His composure, her practiced calm, my face ghosted between them like a bad omen. The mic caught fragments, escrow, vendor codes, cash equivalents, and one phrase that tightened everything in me. Wash through charities. It was said lightly, almost playful, but there was nothing playful about money laundering dressed as goodwill. I wrote the words in the notebook I wasn't looking at, hand steady, heart not. Dessert menus came and went. They skipped sweet and settled the check with the ease of people who never do math in restaurants. When they stood, the room seemed to rise with them. I let 2 tables pass before I followed, counting beats, letting the door close on their cologne and certainty. Outside, the wind off the Hudson cut straight through my coat. They headed north along the path toward Harborside. Their silhouettes doubled in the glass of the office towers. I thought about the first case that had put Kane on my radar. Envelopes, contracts, a judge who loved box seats, and how it had ended with everyone a little richer and me a little older. Tonight felt like a sequel written to be cruel. I tucked the mic wire back under my collar and stood with the water at my back, letting the city's glow wash the cold from my bones. Love is a small story, logistics is a big one. And somewhere between the two, my marriage had become a shipping lane. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the kiss in the park, or the way she'd said ghost copies, like it was a lullaby. I walked to the light rail at Harborside, the kind of ride that gives you time to think, but not enough to heal. Tomorrow I'd call someone who didn't forgive easily, Detective Carla Ruiz. Tonight I filed the voices, the phrases, the tells. The waterfront behind me blurred into a smear of warm light, and the river kept its secrets like it always does, until someone like me drags them, dripping, into the day. You don't just call a police detective out of the blue, not if you want the conversation to go anywhere. You build it the way you'd build a house of cards, careful and steady, because one wrong move and the whole thing collapses. Carla Ruiz wasn't just any detective. She was one of the few still willing to pick up when my name showed on the caller ID. We'd run cases together back when I wore a badge in Jersey City. She knew where the bodies were buried, and she knew I'd helped put a few of them there. I caught her between shifts, a cup of cafecito in her hand, the city noise bleeding through the line from somewhere near the NYPD's 10th precinct. I kept it short. I need eyes on Victor Kane. There was a pause. the kind that tells you someone's flipping through a mental Rolodex of bad history. Then she sighed, a mix of annoyance and curiosity, and told me to meet her in person. We picked a diner on 11th Avenue, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a griddle smell baked into the walls. Carla slid into the seat across from me, leather jacket creaking, hair pulled back tight. She looked me over like she was measuring whether I was worth the risk. "You always did have a talent for chasing trouble," she said. I told her this wasn't just trouble, it was personal. Carla worked the NYPD databases like a pianist at a Steinway, fingers flying, eyes narrowing. Kane's name lit up her screen like a Christmas tree. Shipping manifests flagged by customs. Multiple shell corporations tied to the Port Newark, Elizabeth Marine Terminal. 2 pending investigations into irregularities in container inspections. And then the jackpot. Suspicious activity reports from banks in Newark and Hoboken. Deposits just under reporting thresholds, wired to accounts in Panama and Belize. Classic laundering. She leaned back, arms crossed. "Your guy's up to his old tricks. Only bigger." I asked about the transportation side, and she pulled up an incident report from a month ago. A semi-trailer registered to one of Kane's companies had been stopped on I-78. Manifest said it was hauling automotive parts. Customs said the weight was off by nearly 3 tons. No charges filed. No follow-up. I felt the old itch, the one that starts in your gut and crawls up your spine when you're onto something real. This wasn't just an affair. Rachel wasn't just a bored wife looking for attention. She was sitting at the table with a man who'd turned smuggling into an art form, and she was fluent in the language. Carla closed the laptop and gave me a look I'd seen before, back when we were chasing mobsters and dirty councilmen. "You're not going to like where this goes, Mark. And if your wife's mixed up in it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Outside, the wind coming off the Hudson was sharp enough to make my eyes water. I stood there for a minute, watching the traffic crawl toward the Holland Tunnel, and thought about the way Rachel had smiled at Kane in that park, in that restaurant. Not just a smile, a signal. The thing about signals is, once you learn to read them, you can't unsee them. And now I could see them everywhere. The thing about the interstate at night is that it doesn't forgive mistakes. Out here, the air smelled of scorched rubber and diesel, with the faint tang of salt from the bay carried inland by the wind. Sodium lamps cast the asphalt in a sickly orange, the kind that made every shadow look like it was hiding something. One wrong move at 70 miles an hour, and you're part of the debris field. I'd been shadowing the truck since it pulled out of a warehouse near Port Newark. Midnight, no company logos, just a dull silver trailer riding low like it was carrying something it didn't want weighed. The plates matched one of Kane's shell companies Carla had dug up, the same one tied to that automotive parts stop on I-78. The cab was a battered Peterbilt, black paint dull under the sodium lights. The driver kept it steady until we merged onto the westbound stretch, where traffic thinned and the city glow faded in the mirrors. I held back 2 car lengths in the Caprice, just another pair of headlights in the dark. My dash cam was rolling, a telephoto lens sitting on the passenger seat, and my gut was telling me this run wasn't about car parts. Then the truck drifted right, slow and deliberate, crowding me toward the shoulder. Not a lazy swerve. This was the kind of move you make when you've spotted a tail and you're deciding what to do about it. I dropped a gear, swung left, but he mirrored me. The Peterbilt's rear lights flared, brake check hard enough to make my seatbelt bite my shoulder. The world narrowed to 2 strips of asphalt and the red glow ahead. My tires screamed against the cold pavement, and the steering wheel fought me like it wanted out of my hands. For a heartbeat, the trailer's corrugated metal filled the windshield, every dent and scratch a warning that I was one mistake away from becoming part of its cargo. I swerved, tires whining, and that's when I saw him glance in the side mirror. Young, maybe late 20s, ball cap low. He floored it. The diesel roared, gears whining, and we were eating up asphalt, weaving between the few late-night cars still out here. My speedometer climbed past 80. I stayed with him, heart punching a slow, steady beat, eyes flicking between his tail lights and the empty lanes ahead. At mile marker 45, he made his move. The truck jerked left, straddling 2 lanes, then swung back hard, cutting me off so close I could count the rivets on the trailer door. I hit the brakes, tires skidding, the Caprice fishtailing just enough to see the glint of a padlock on those rear doors. The padlock swung once in the wind, catching a wash of orange from the overhead lights. Too heavy for an empty load. My gut told me it wasn't spare auto parts. It was something that needed to stay hidden more than it needed to stay safe. He wanted me gone, off the road, out of the picture, before I saw too much. But here's the thing. I'm stubborn, and I don't like being pushed. I kept my foot in it, riding his wake, every bump in the asphalt rattling my teeth. The air smelled like hot brakes and diesel, the wind howling through a crack in my window. We hit a downgrade, and I saw my opening. A gap in the median barrier up ahead, an emergency turnaround. I dropped 2 gears, surged left, and cut across before he could block me. In my rear view, his headlights flared, then shrank as I took the ramp toward a service road. I pulled over under a dead streetlight, engine ticking, hands gripping the wheel until the knuckles went white. My pulse was still in my ears, but my mind was already turning over what I'd seen. A trailer riding heavy, a driver willing to risk a felony maneuver to shake a tail, and a lock that wasn't there for show. Whatever Kane was moving, it wasn't legal. And now he knew I was looking. I'd tailed killers, thieves, men who'd sell their own blood if the price was right. But this was bleeding into my kitchen table, into the woman I'd once promised to protect. The line between the job and my life had been erased, and I wasn't sure who'd crossed it first. By the time I made it back to the city, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving only questions. I didn't head straight home, circled for hours, checking mirrors, making sure no one was running the same tale on me. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the city felt too still. Back in my North Beach apartment, the city felt quieter than it should have. New York nights usually hum, distant sirens bleeding in from 8th Avenue, the rumble of the subway somewhere deep below, footsteps passing beneath the bay windows. But that night the air was heavy, thick, like the block was holding its breath. I locked the door, dropped my keys in the bowl by habit, and went straight to my desk. The footage from I-78 was still playing in my head, the glow of brake lights, the glint of that padlock, so I put it on screen before memory could start inventing details. Grainy in the low light, but clear enough to make out the trailer's markings, the way it rode low on the rear axle. I tagged every frame, cataloged stills, then began the backup routine I've followed for years. One local copy, one encrypted drive, and one cloud upload that hides in plain sight under a fake travel blog. Halfway through the upload, the screen froze. Not a crash, just a stillness so unnatural it made the hairs on my arms lift. Then the cursor moved. Not mine. It slid across the desktop, opened folders in quick succession, like a hand rifling through my desk drawers. My stomach dropped. I yanked the Ethernet cable. The cursor kept moving. It found the Liberty State Park photos first, Rachel's hand on Kane's cheek, the kiss. Deleted in an instant. Then the audio files from the waterfront, the ones where she and Kane mapped out their scheme over burgundy and linen. Gone. The I-78 dash cam footage followed, frame by frame, erased so fast it felt surgical. The monitor flickered, blinked to black, then came back with a desktop so clean it could have been a new machine. My case folder was gone, the backup drive flashing an error I'd never seen before, volume unreadable. That's when I noticed the reflection in the glass pane beside my desk, my own face lit by the monitor, and beyond it, down on the street, the shape of a black SUV idling half a block away. No headlights, exhaust curling into the cool air. I stepped closer to the window, careful to stay in the shadows. Could have been a neighbor's car. Could have been anyone. But after watching my work vanish in real time, anyone wasn't a luxury I had. I killed the apartment lights. The darkness felt like armor, thin but better than nothing. I sat in the quiet and listened. Every sound became suspect. The low creak from the floor above, the muffled cough from the alley, the hum of a refrigerator compressor kicking on. I reached for my phone to call Carla. Battery dead. Odd, I'd barely touched it all day. I popped the back cover and found the SIM loose in its tray, just enough to keep it from connecting. Like someone had handled it. That's when I noticed the framed photo on my desk, tilted just slightly, like it had been moved and set back without care. A faint trace of cologne I didn't wear hung in the air, mixing with the dust. The backup drive's casing had a fresh, hairline scratch near the USB port, the kind you don't get from normal use. Someone had been here, with enough time to touch everything that mattered. The thought hit cold. They'd been here. Not they might have been. Not maybe. Someone had stood where I was sitting now, scrolled through my files, touched my phone, and left without a trace except for the hole in my work and the tightening in my chest. The breach wasn't just about erasing evidence. It was a message. Kane knew I was digging. And now he wasn't just a face in my lens or a name in Carla's database. He was in my walls, in my routines, in my head. There's a rule in this line of work. Once you know you're being watched, you stop acting like prey. But sitting there in the dark, listening to the city pretend it didn't notice me, I realized something worse. Kane wasn't watching to see what I'd do next. He was letting me know he already knew. And that meant I was playing catch-up in a game I didn't fully understand. It was just past 7 when the phone rang. Not my cell, that was still lying dead on the desk like a piece of evidence, but the landline, the one I kept tucked against the wall, half buried under unopened mail. Most days it was silent. When it did ring, it usually meant someone had something they didn't want traced. Mark DeLuca? The voice was rough, freight yard rough, like a man who'd spent more years breathing diesel than clean air. That depends who's asking. This is Jake. Jake Marino. I think we got something in common. A problem named Victor Kane. I didn't say anything right away. Names like Kane, you don't confirm too fast. Jake kept talking. Said he drove long haul out of Newark, mostly nights, with a route that sometimes put him near the docks. 2 weeks back, he'd been idling outside a Kane Freight Solutions warehouse off Doremus Avenue. The manifest was late, and he was killing time in his cab when a black Mercedes rolled up to the loading dock. Guy gets out, tall, slick, silver hair. Kane, right? And this woman, brunette, green sweater. She looked like she didn't belong there. I could see it in my head before he even finished. Rachel, in that same sweater from Liberty State Park, standing where no reason could put her. She gets in his car, Jake continued. No hesitation, like they'd done it 100 times. And the way he put his hand on her back, let's just say it wasn't business. I kept my voice flat, asked if he'd meet somewhere public. He hesitated, long enough for me to hear the hum of a truck stop TV in the background, then agreed to a diner off Route 1. The kind where the coffee is bad and the booths are full of men who've been awake too long. Jake was mid-30s, lean but solid, with eyes that stayed restless even when he sat still. We ordered breakfast, eggs over easy for him, black coffee for me. He leaned in over the chipped formica and told me more. About unmarked containers arriving after midnight. About manifests that claimed one thing while forklifts unloaded another. About security guards who didn't look like warehouse staff. Clean cuts, clipped speech, the kind of posture you only get from a badge or the military. And always, somewhere in the picture, Kane. Watching, directing, smiling like the rules didn't apply to him. Jake said he hadn't told anyone else. You start talking about missing cargo and the wrong people hear it. You end up under a bridge. I like breathing. Before he left, he reached into his jacket and slid a piece of paper across the table. Creased, smudged with grease, folded into fourths. A container number and a date written in blocky letters. That's the one she was there for, he said. Find out what's inside. You'll know more than I do. Maybe more than you want to. I tucked it into my jacket without looking. Outside, the air was sharp with the smell of wet asphalt. Jake climbed into his rig, the diesel rumble shaking the parking lot, and pulled onto the highway without another word. I stood there a moment longer, the paper warm from my pocket, the number already burning itself into my thoughts. Rachel at Kane's warehouse wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. She wasn't near the edge of this thing. She was in the middle of it. And now I had a thread to pull. The only question was whether it would lead to the truth or straight to the noose Kane had been tightening around my neck. I didn't drive straight to the port. Not yet. Before I chased the number Jake gave me, there was one conversation I couldn't put off any longer. If Rachel was in the middle of this, I needed to hear it from her and see if she'd even try to deny it. The house in Jersey City looked the same from the curb. Red brick, 2 stories, the old maple tree out front stripped bare by February wind. But stepping through the front door, I could feel it in my bones. The air was wrong. Stale, heavy, like the place had been holding its breath. Rachel was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with her laptop open, a mug cooling beside her. She looked up when she heard the door, her smile small but deliberate, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. The smile dropped when she saw my face. I didn't take off my coat. Just walked in, pulled the Liberty State Park photos from my bag, printed, not digital, because I'd already learned that lesson, and set them on the coffee table. She glanced at them, then at me, eyes sharper than her voice when she said, "Mark, don't." My tone was flat. "Just look." She did. Her fingers brushed the top print, the one where Kane's hand is on her cheek, their faces too close to pass off as friendly. No denial, no gasp, just slow, steady breathing, the way she does when she's buying time. After a long pause, she leaned back, folded her hands in her lap, and said quietly, "You were always good at finding things." That's not an answer. Her gaze drifted past me to the front window, as though she half expected Kane's Mercedes to be idling at the curb. "You don't understand who he is. What he can do. This isn't about you and me anymore." Her voice cracked for just a second, not from guilt, but something colder. "He has things, Mark. On people. On me." She looked down at her hands. "Once you're in, you don't get to walk away. Not without paying for it. It's exactly about you and me." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You didn't just betray me, Rachel. You're working with a man who moves contraband across state lines, launders money through fake charities, and buries anyone who gets in the way. And you've been helping him." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "If you push him, you'll be one of them." It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. The radiator ticked in the corner, the faint rumble of the path train drifted up from underground, and for a moment the world outside felt very far away. She wasn't scared of me finding out. She was scared of what Kane would do next. I thought about the day we moved into this house, how she'd stood in this same room, sunlight on her hair, telling me it finally felt like home. Now it felt like a staging ground, a place where Kane's shadow could stretch without ever stepping inside. I slid the photos back into the envelope, tucking them under my arm. "You made your choice," I said. "Now I make mine." "You think you're the first to try and pull me out?" she said suddenly, her voice flat. "The others didn't even make it to the door." She didn't follow me to the door, didn't call my name, just sat there with her hands folded, eyes on the window, like she was listening for an engine she already knew too well. Outside, the cold bit deep, sharper than I remembered. I looked back once at the lit rectangle of the living room window. She was still there, still watching the street, but not for me. Kane had her, maybe for the money, maybe for leverage, maybe because he could. But now he knew he had me too. And that meant the next move couldn't just be smart. It had to hurt. I didn't go home after Jersey City. Home didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a vulnerability. Instead, I drove the length of Montgomery Street toward the waterfront, the Hudson throwing back the city lights like scattered coins. My hands stayed loose on the wheel, but my head was wired tight, every intersection a place Kane could be watching from. Carla picked the meat spot. A municipal garage near the precinct, fluorescent lit and empty except for her unmarked sedan. She was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, the kind of look that asked how deep the hole had gotten this time. I popped the trunk and pulled the envelope. Photos. Notes. A fresh printout of the container number Jake Marino had given me. No digital trail, nothing Kane could reach without breaking into my skull. She flipped through the evidence, her expression flattening. This is enough to get a task force looking, she said. But you know how long looking takes. I don't need them to look, I told her. I need them to move. Carla studied me for a long beat. You've already made yourself a target. She held my gaze for a moment longer. If you go after him like this, you better not miss. The kind of line that isn't a warning, it's a verdict. I shrugged. Then at least make it worth the shot. She slid the envelope under her arm, already walking toward her car. We'll be in touch, she said. That was all. No promises. No reassurances. Just the quiet weight of a cop who'd seen enough to know you don't speak the ending out loud. I stayed there until her taillights vanished, then walked back to the Caprice. The night air was sharp, the kind that makes you feel the shape of your lungs. I started the engine, the dashboard clock reading just past 11, and pulled out toward the Holland Tunnel. The radio was off. The streets blurred into one another. The empty loading docks, the shuttered bodegas, the long shadows under the overpasses. Somewhere out there, Kane was still moving his pieces. Somewhere closer, Rachel was still in his pocket. I hit the tunnel entrance, the city narrowing into concrete and tile. The sound of the tires changed, echoing low and hollow, like a drumbeat counting me down. When I came up on the other side, the skyline opened in the rear view, bright, cold, untouchable. I didn't look back, because this wasn't over. It was just the part where the board gets cleared, and both sides decide how badly they're willing to play. And I already knew my answer, because I'd already found the first crack in his armor, and I planned to drive a truck through it.